Welcome, and thank you for reviewing this recorded presentation on the application process for the Nonprofit Infrastructure Capital Improvement Program, or NICIP, which is how the program will be identified throughout the presentation. Before we begin, we would like to remind everyone listening that the NICIP grant program is highly competitive, and it is anticipated that the full allotment of funds will be awarded during this application cycle. The total number of awards will depend upon the number of applications received, as well as the score awarded to each application based upon responsiveness to the criteria set forth in the Request for Applications, or RFA, which is how it will be referred to throughout this presentation. Therefore, it's very important to note that in addition to attending this webinar, applicants should review the RFA in great detail, as well as all of the supporting documentation prior to applying. This information and documentation can be found on both Grants Gateway and DASNY's NICIP website. Here's a brief outline of the topics that will be addressed today. Summary of questions received, NICIP program overview, review of the request for applications, guidelines for submitting a complete application, prerequisites to the Grant Disbursement Agreement, or GDA, and the NICIP timeline. We'll start by going over a summary of the questions that DASNY received via the SurveyMonkey website between October 2nd and October 31st. We received a total of 447 questions from 250 individuals. Based on the categories identified by potential applicants, the majority of questions relate to eligibility. We will try to address the areas of most concern in the following sections of the presentation. Please note that the areas of clarification are not intended to replace the RFA or be exhaustive. Rather, they are clarifying areas where there were questions. Next, we will dive into the NICIP program overview. The primary purpose of the NICIP grant program is to make targeted investments throughout the state in capital projects that will improve or maintain the quality, efficiency, accessibility of nonprofit human services organizations that serve New Yorkers, as defined in Section 2.1 of the RFA. Between the years 2015 and 2018, a total of $120 million was appropriated in the state budget to support the work of the state's nonprofit direct human service partners. The first round of NICIP was highly competitive, and a total of 269 grants were awarded to nonprofits across New York State. An additional $50 million was appropriated in the 2022-2023 enacted budget. The $50 million will be combined with the withdrawals and forfeitures of the previous NICIP round, and no less than $60 million will be made available for this RFA. The NICIP funding opportunity is posted both on the Grants Gateway as well as on DASNY's NICIP website. When searching for the funding opportunity in Grants Gateway, potential applicants should go to the Grant Opportunity portal, click Search for Opportunities, and then search by grant opportunity. Searching for a keyword such as nonprofit should bring up the opportunity for you. This applicant webinar is for informational purposes only. The information provided is intended to provide general guidance with respect to the application process and NICIP program, and should not be construed as final approval or disapproval of any particular project or project costs. Potential applicants must read the RFA to determine if a project would be eligible for funding, and if it meets the requirements set forth in the enabling NICIP statute and RFA. Often, the determination as to eligibility is very fact-specific and is made on a case-by-case basis. Applicants are encouraged to provide a robust description of their project that will be funded by the NICIP grant, as well as how the project is consistent with the NICIP enabling legislation and the RFA within their application. Next, we'll go over the review of the requests for applications. This NICIP funding opportunity is going to be highly competitive. Awards will be offered through rolling application periods on a first-come, first-served basis. Applications will be scored in the order in which they are received and according to the scoring criteria as described in Section 4.2 of the RFA. An organization can only submit one application. If more than one application is submitted, only the first application will be reviewed and scored. Applications will be scored based heavily on project viability and must be shovel-ready. A project is considered shovel-ready when the applicant is able to begin their project within a very short time frame. The NICIP funding opportunity is not for organizations that are unsure of what project or projects they want to complete. It is expected that the project will be fully completed and all payment requisitions will be processed and paid by December 31st, 2026. No extensions will be approved. Any NICIP funds not dispersed by the state will be forfeited by the applicant and made available for future funding opportunities. Again, there will be no extensions or exceptions to this rule. The number of awards made will be dependent on the number of applications received and the scoring of the applications. Applications must achieve a minimum score of 95 out of 100 points for project viability to be considered a qualified applicant. All qualified applications will be advanced to DASNY for formal reviews until the entirety of the funding pool has been utilized. We'll discuss the scoring criteria later in the presentation. Awards will range between $50,000, which is the minimum amount an organization can request, and $500,000, which is the maximum amount an organization can request. No award can exceed $500,000. Due to the anticipated high demand of NICIP funding and in keeping with the intent to invest in time-sensitive projects, all NICIP qualifying applicants are expected to fully comply with and complete all required reviews within 6 months from when they are notified their application was deemed qualified for DASNY processing. Failure to meet this deadline will constitute forfeiture of the NICIP funding opportunity, and the funds will be returned to the NICIP pool to be made available to the next successive qualifying NICIP applicant. A NICIP applicant that is subject to such forfeiture would be eligible to submit a new NICIP application in future NICIP funding opportunities. Due to the competitive nature of the award process, changes to the project scope and/or project location will not be permitted at any time in the grant administration process. If an applicant cannot complete the project as it was described at the location set forth in the application, the NICIP award will be forfeited. There are very strict deadlines that applicants must adhere to throughout the application and grant administration process to ensure we're keeping with the intent to invest in time-sensitive projects. Out of the $120 million that was previously awarded in the past round between 2016 and 2018, there is still at least $10.7 million worth of unspent funds, and many of those projects have not yet started. There are several key events that applicants must keep in mind, and several of these dates have recently changed. Between announcing the funding opportunity on October 2nd and through October 31st, DASNY accepted questions via the SurveyMonkey website listed in Section 3 of the RFA. As of November 15th, 2023, all of those questions were answered and were posted on both Grants Gateway and DASNY's NICIP website. Some answers were recently updated on November 30th, so please make sure you're reviewing the most recently updated version. Applicants will need to ensure their Grants Gateway document vault is pre-qualified prior to November 30th. All applicants must be pre-qualified prior to submitting a NICIP application. Please be aware that uploading documentation to the document vault and obtaining the appropriate status may take multiple weeks. It's recommended that all potential NICIP applicants start the gateway process or update their existing document vault as soon as possible to ensure they are eligible to apply for the application deadline. If you already have a Grants Gateway document vault, please be sure to check when it will expire. We'll discuss the Grants Gateway later in the presentation. The rolling application period will begin on December 15th, 2023 at 9 a.m. and will end on February 15th, 2024. All NICIP applications must be submitted by 5 p.m. on Thursday, February 15th. It's very important to note that due to the New York State Grants Gateway conversion to SFS, there will be a blackout period from January 9th, 2024 through January 18th, 2024. The NICIP application will not be available during this time period, but is expected to be available again as of 9 a.m. on January 18th. The grants gateway will not allow applications to be completed and/or submitted after the submission period has ended. Incomplete and/or unsubmitted applications will not be considered. DASNY will begin scoring the applications on December 18th. Applications will be scored on a first-come, first-served basis, and applications will be scored in the order in which they are received. If the average score meets the minimum threshold, which is 95 out of 100, the application will be deemed qualified for DASNY processing. NICIP applications will remain on the authorized NICIP list until February 15th, 2025. After that date, all applicants will have to reapply for future funding opportunities. As outlined in Section 2.2 of the RFA, organizations are eligible to apply for a NICIP grant only if all of the following criteria is satisfied. 1, the organization is registered with Grants Gateway and pre-qualified under the applicant's legal name on file with the Department of State and IRS at the time and date the application is submitted. Applicants are strongly encouraged to review their document vaults prior to the application deadline to verify that it is current. 2, the organization is a human services organization as further defined in Section 2.1 of the RFA. 3, the organization provides direct services in New York State to individuals and families residing in New York State as further defined in Section 2.1 of the RFA. 4, if the organization applied previously for a grant under a prior NICIP round and received an award, they can only apply for an award under this RFA if they have received an executed grant disbursement agreement and have either drawn down 100% of their award or notified DASNY that the project's completed and that no further requisitions will be submitted, or the previous NICIP award has been withdrawn by the organization prior to application deadline under this RFA. 5, the organization has not received and is not receiving any other funding from New York State for the same project it outlines on its NICIP application. And 6, the organization has or will have site control over the project location at the time of application under its legal name on file with the Department of State and the IRS, as further described in Section 2.3 of the RFA. For purposes of this RFA, the following organizations are deemed not to be human services organizations offering direct services and are not eligible to apply for a NICIP grant. Colleges and universities, elementary and secondary schools, whether public or private, hospitals, nursing homes, and diagnostic and treatment centers authorized under Article 28 of the New York State Public Health Law. It's very important to note here that organizations that operate our Article 28 facilities may use NICIP funding to improve separate facilities, so long as the facilities receiving the NICIP funding do not meet the definition of an Article 28 facility. Fire departments, libraries, museums, theaters, parks, or gardens, organizations whose primary function is lobbying or advocacy, organizations whose primary function is volunteer recruitment and placement, membership or umbrella organizations that provide services to another organization and not directly to an individual or family or groups of individuals and families, organizations that provide services to another organization but not directly to an individual or family or groups of individuals and families, organizations that are performing provider system lead for a delivery system reform incentive payment program or DSRIP network, and municipal corporations. Only one project location per application is allowed. One application can cover a single purpose or multi-purpose project at a single site, but not a single purpose project at multiple sites. For example, an applicant can submit one application to fix multiple infrastructure issues at a single site. For example, replace all windows, install a new roof, create accessible entryways at a single address. However, an applicant cannot submit one application to install new windows at Site A and replace bathroom fixtures at Site B. As previously mentioned, organizations can only submit one application. If more than one application is submitted, only the first application will be reviewed and scored. Site control is required to prove that the applicant has sufficient authorization and control to undertake the project at the project location. To determine this, applicants will be asked to provide a copy of the deed or lease that's under the applicant's legal name on file with the Department of State and IRS. If the applicant owns the location, they will need to provide a copy of their deed. If they lease the location, then they will need to provide a copy of their lease agreement. The lease must extend at least 5 years from the date the application has been submitted, and the lease term will be verified again at grant disbursement agreement stage to ensure that sufficient time remains on the lease term. If landlord approval is required per the terms and conditions of the lease agreement, applicants should provide the consent letter with the lease. NICIP funding must be used for the primary benefit of the applicant and the applicant's eligible programs. Therefore, improvements to leased real property will be evaluated carefully to determine whether the landlord or the applicant will be the primary beneficiary of the expenditure of the grant funds. If at any point in the process, DASNY determines that the applicant is not the primary beneficiary, the application will no longer be deemed qualified and the funding will be forfeited. Project locations that have been or will be funded by tax credit structures are ineligible for NICIP funding, as well as religious entities and locations. Please refer to Section 2.3 of the RFA for additional information and requirements. All projects must meet the following criteria in order to be considered eligible for NICIP funding. The project must be an eligible construction or technology project as per the enabling NICIP statute as noted in the chart in Section 2.4 of the RFA. The project cannot have started nor the costs incurred prior to April 1st, 2023. The only costs that could have been incurred prior to this date are design, engineering, and other preliminary planning activities. Any costs incurred prior to April 1st, 2023, though, including the ones that were just mentioned, will not be reimbursed from the grant funds. The project must be completed and all payment requisitions processed by December 31st, 2026. We will discuss this requirement later on in the presentation. The project cannot have been funded in whole or part by other funding from New York State. This is referring to capital dollars from a state funding source, such as a state-funded grant program. This is not referring to programmatic state funding. Here's some examples of eligible and ineligible costs. Some eligible project examples are replacing aging roofs, installing HVAC systems, installing energy-efficient windows, purchase and installation of computer hardware to improve organization's electronic records, data analysis, or confidentiality, security cameras, and installation of wheelchair ramps. Some examples of ineligible projects include renovating a space or purchasing furniture, fixtures, and equipment for spaces primarily used for administrative, storage, or training, repairing installation or windows, purchasing LED bulbs for existing light fixtures, leasing or financing solar panels, standalone painting, asbestos abatement, carpeting, brick repointing that is not part of a larger renovation project, and software subscriptions, licensing fees, monitoring fees, internet services, cloud storage, training fees, etc. Applicants are advised that grants will be funded only to applicants that can demonstrate that the project is fully funded and can be completed with the grant funds and other committed funding as necessary. As part of the cost justification requirement that's outlined in Section 2.5 of the RFA, applicants must complete the capital-based budget form, provide cost estimate or estimates prepared by a design or construction professional, as well as narratives that explain how the applicant arrived at the cost estimates. The budget categories are as follows: scoping and pre-development, design, construction, and other. If the estimated cost of the project exceeds the amount of the grant, the applicant must provide evidence of sufficient committed funding resources necessary to complete the project as described. If the project includes costs that are ineligible for reimbursement, the application must clearly show that ineligible costs will be funded from other sources of committed funding. At least one qualified estimate dated no earlier than April 1st, 2023 for each project task involved in the project should be submitted. All project costs can be combined on one contractor estimate, or multiple estimates for the various project tasks can be submitted. For example, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, finished carpentry. Examples of sufficient documentation to show evidence of committed funding includes recently audited financial statements, bank account and investment account statements, non-New York State grant award letters, agreements and contracts, etc. Additional examples of acceptable documentation is outlined in Section 2.5 of the RFA. We will discuss the financial review in greater detail further along in the presentation. The financial review will be completed once an application is forwarded to DASNY as a qualified applicant. Before the applications are scored, all applications will be evaluated on a pass-fail basis to ensure the minimum requirements for eligibility have been met. The pass-fail requirements are as follows. 1. Pre-qualification at the time the application is submitted under the legal name of applicant on file with the Department of State and IRS. 2. Eligibility of applicant as defined by Section 2.1 and 2.2 of the RFA. 3. Project location eligibility as defined by Section 2.3 of the RFA. 4. Project cost eligibility as defined by Section 2.4 of the RFA. And 5. Project funding eligibility as defined by Section 2.5 of the RFA. Supporting documentation that will be reviewed by the eligibility screeners for the pass-fail section include, but are not limited to, applicants' pre-qualification history and pre-qualification status report printouts, and applicants' Department of State Corporations Bureau printout. This information will be independently accessed by the eligibility screeners and is not required to be submitted by the applicants with their NICIP application. However, DASNY must be able to locate this documentation for the applicant in order to complete the pass-fail eligibility review. We will find the pre-qualification history and status report in the applicant's Grants Gateway document vault, and the Department of State Corporations Bureau printout will be found on the Department of State website. If an application passes eligibility, the application will be scored based on project viability as evidenced by the following: project description and support for project costs, anticipated project timeframe, other projected funding sources, and project location viability. Supporting documentation that should be submitted for the criteria listed above include the following: recent estimates, invoices, and quotes to support project costs from vendors authorized to do business in New York State and under the applicant's legal name. All cost estimates should be dated no earlier than April 1st, 2023. Recent bank statements in applicant's legal name to evidence funds committed to support project is fully funded if the total project cost is in excess of the grant award. All statements should be no earlier than September 30th, 2023. Seeker and SHPO documentation, if applicable, permit or other documentation of regulatory approvals, if applicable to your project. All estimates, quotes, and proposals cannot be dated prior to April 1st, 2023, and bank statements submitted as proof of additional funding cannot be prior to September 30th, 2023. Projects must achieve a minimum average score of 95 out of 100 points for project viability in order to be considered a qualified application. As mentioned throughout the presentation, applications will be scored on a first-come, first-served basis, and applications will be scored in order in which they are received. If the average score meets the minimum threshold, the application will be deemed qualified for DASNY processing. The date and time of submission of the NICIP application in the Grants Gateway will be the determining factor of the order of scoring. Now I'm going to turn it over to Annie Shaw, who will go over the scoring.
Yes, thank you, Mag. In the previous recording in this, we described this application process as an open book test. In the RFA appendix list, you will see the scoring matrix. This is the exact matrix that will be used by the eligibility reviewers and the scorers for the NICIP program. While we encourage you many, many times to read the documentation, we cannot stress strongly enough how important it is for any prospective applicant to review the scoring metrics to see exactly how we will judge your application. This should help you clearly identify the documents and the information we'll need. Going first through the pass-fail eligibility, you can see the very first thing we will do from our own access points is check your document vault. Is it there? Are you pre-qualified? When does your qualification expire? Again, our eligibility reviewers can access information directly from the gateway. You need not submit anything here. You just need to know that your own document vault is up to date. All the relevant information is in it, and you have a pre-qualified status before you submit your application. This is one of the largest reasons why we pushed back the open application period. A large influx of new organizations came into the Grants Gateway to pre-qualify themselves in anticipation of applying to the NICIP program. There were so many applications pending pre-qualification review at various state agencies, we realized the qualification reviewers would not be able to clear these organizations prior to December 1st. That's one of the largest reasons we pushed the date back 2 more weeks to let the Grants Gateway system catch up on pre-quals. So you're pre-qualified, you're good. Double check. November is a very heavy expiration and annual expiration date for a lot of organizations, because if your financial calendar is January to December, then your 990 and other documentation is due to be uploaded as a refresher into the gateway in November. So make sure you are currently pre-qualified. Then follow along through the rest of the questions. The same is true on the construction feasibility, project viability section, where we'll actually score. Once your application is deemed qualified, it goes off to the score team. We will follow along. You can move on to the next slide, please, Meg. We will follow along in that order and follow these questions. Was this information submitted with the application? Is it relevant to the application? We got a number of questions in SurveyMonkey about the various categories of your budget. The capital-based budget, which while you can't physically access until December 15th, there is a sample copy for you in Appendix 1, the application questions and capital-based budget form. If your project has these categories in its budget, whether they be scoping and development, design, construction, or other, which is where you would put any equipment you might purchase, provide that information. If it doesn't apply to you, simply put non-applicable. When the score team reviews your application, they will judge the information you provided only on the categories for which there's actual information. If you're not purchasing any equipment, if you have no other category information to fill, if your project is 100% design and construction, then in all the other categories, your application will receive the highest points allowed. That was one of the questions. Someone was very concerned that if they didn't have equipment or didn't have scoping and design, they would lose those points. It's exactly the opposite. If you don't have anything in those categories, the points are yours automatically, and we'll continue on through. Again, think of this as an open book test. How will your application be scored? It's all there. It's right there in the scoring sheet. Review it, see it. With the pass-fail questions, they're all yes or no answers. If you have the information, if it applies to you, you get a yes. If you don't have the information, it's either non-applicable or you will get a no or a fail. That's how we're doing it. Straightforward, 100% above board. And we'll go all the way through. The points will be totaled automatically in the gateway system, and we will move through it. As for scoring, we will do this in the order they're received. Obviously, we anticipate by Monday, December 18th, to having a number to score. Our team is very conscientious, very thorough, and will work as smoothly and as quickly as possible. But we anticipate that it is going to take a number of weeks to score the NICIP application. Do not panic if you submit an application on the 15th, 16th, or 17th December and you don't hear from anyone by the 20th. We're going to have our work cut out for us. We will score them as quickly and as efficiently as we can. And we do anticipate notifying everyone as soon as they are advanced to processing at DASNY. The DASNY Grants Administration team will reach out to the organization. You will receive an emailed award letter notifying you that you are a qualifying applicant, and we will go on from there. For those that are unfortunately deemed non-eligible or do not score points, we will provide that information further down the road when we have enough of the applications to utilize the funds that are available at this time. We will post the eligibility and scoring, the folks that passed and the folks that did not. We will not post the individual scores for the applicants to preserve some element of privacy for the applications. Okay, I think that covers everything, Meg. I'll toss it on back to you.
Thank you, Annie. Next, we'll go over the guidelines for submitting a complete application. This includes tips from Grants Gateway. The NICIP application must be completed and submitted in the Grants Gateway, and DASNY cannot accept applications any other way. Applicants are strongly encouraged to submit their applications at least 48 hours prior to the due date and time to allow sufficient opportunity to obtain assistance and take corrective action should there be any technical issues with the submission process. Grants Gateway has provided several tips and tricks that applicants should be mindful of when applying for the NICIP opportunity. Each individual file must be no larger than 12 megabytes. The system allows for JPG, Word documents, Excel documents, and PDF documents. However, PDF documents are preferred. If you have particularly large files, the Grants Gateway Help Desk may be able to reduce the size of them without compromising the quality. You can email the Grants Gateway Help Desk for assistance. Ensure that your PDF files do not contain password protection or security features. The system will be unable to read these types of documents and the application PDF will fail. This does not mean that your application will be rejected, but it will make it harder for DASNY to review it. About 10 to 15 minutes after your application has been submitted, the system should have created the application PDF for you. This can be located in the Forms menu under Application Versions page. Please look for this document. If it has not been created after 20 minutes, please email the Grants Gateway Help Desk so they can investigate. It's very important to note here again that due to the New York State Grants Gateway conversion to SFS, there will be a blackout period from January 9th, 2024 through January 18th, 2024. The NICIP application will not be available during this time period, but it is expected to be available again as of 9 a.m. on January 18th. There are three main areas that applicants will need to focus on when applying for the NICIP opportunity. First, applicants must have a pre-qualified document vault in Grants Gateway prior to submitting a NICIP application. We will discuss this requirement later. Second, applicants must review the RFA, including all appendices in great detail. Appendix 1 is the NICIP application. Appendix 2 is the scoring matrix. Appendix 3 is the frequently asked questions, and Appendix 4 is the sample grant disbursement agreement. Third, apply for the NICIP opportunity in Grants Gateway during the open submission period. Remember, all NICIP applications will be scored on a first-come, first-served basis until the qualifying applicants utilize all available funds. It's very important to note that applications must be submitted to New York State for review in the Grants Gateway by the established due date and time. The Grants Gateway will not allow applications to be completed and/or submitted after the submission period has ended, which is February 15th, 2024. Incomplete and/or unsubmitted applications will not be considered. Next, we'll go over the prerequisites to Grant Disbursement Agreement, or GDA. This includes the DASNY reviews and NICIP timeline. As mentioned throughout the presentation, applications will be scored on a first-come, first-served basis. Scoring will commence within 2 weeks of the commencement of the application window. Applications meeting scoring requirements will be deemed qualifying applicants as funds permit. DASNY will notify the organizations that they have been deemed qualifying as the determinations are made. Once a qualifying applicant has been sent to DASNY for review, DASNY will undertake a financial, environmental, bond, and tax counsel review. DASNY will also determine whether required regulatory approvals have been obtained and that sufficient site control is in place. For the financial review, DASNY will conduct a financial review in connection with each qualifying application in order to verify that sufficient funds have been incurred in the amount necessary to complete the project and that such funds meet all applicable criteria set forth in the RFA. As set forth in Section 2.5 of the RFA, the applicant must clearly show that the full project amount is secured. For the seeker, for projects requiring an environmental review pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, the applicant must provide either the finding statement or the negative declaration prepared by the seeker lead agency in connection with the project. If a State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, SHPO, review will be required for the project, applicants should submit their project to the Cultural Resource Information System, or CRIS, CRIS, as soon as possible to ensure the SHPO determination is received prior to the 6-month deadline timeframe that you have once an application has been sent to DASNY and deemed qualifying. Again, as I said, all qualified applicants must fully comply with and complete all required DASNY reviews within 6 months from when they are notified that their application was deemed qualifying for DASNY processing. There will be no exceptions or extensions to this, even if the SHPO review, for example, is the only item holding up the review. Qualified applicants will also be required to complete several due diligence documents, including but not limited to the grantee certification, project certification, and grantee questionnaire. The applicant's Grants Gateway document vault must also remain in pre-qualified status throughout the entire grant administration and reimbursement process. As outlined in Section 4.3 of the RFA, it's very important to note that due to the competitive nature of the process, changes to the project scope and/or project location will not be permitted at any point in the grant administration process. If an applicant can no longer complete the project as described in the application or at the location set forth in the application, then the project will be forfeited. The grant will be forfeited. There will be no exceptions to this. DASNY will forward a GDA, or a grant disbursement agreement, to the qualifying applicant once the aforementioned reviews, as applicable, have been completed. The GDA is the contract between the qualifying applicant and DASNY. The qualifying applicant will review and sign the GDA, which will then be forwarded to the applicant's attorney for review. This is all done via DocuSign. Upon the qualified applicant's return of the GDA to DASNY, DASNY will review the GDA for completeness and accuracy, which will include verification that the budget has not changed, or that a valid rationale is given for the change, and the budget does not materially affect the approved project timeline or budget. The exhibits are properly completed. An appropriate opinion of counsel letter has been provided as required by Exhibit B of the GDA, and no other issues have arisen that would affect the status of the grant. Once this review is complete, DASNY will arrange for the execution of the GDA. Once the GDA is fully executed, the grantee may begin to requisition funds using the forms included as exhibits in the GDA. The grantee must forward requisitions directly to DASNY's accounts payable unit. DASNY will perform an audit with respect to each requisition received from the nonprofit organization, which will include, but shall not be limited to, verification that proper documentation has been received. DASNY will provide reimbursement with NICIP funds only up to the amount of funding set forth in the GDA. If a project goes over budget, it will be the responsibility of the grantee to cover additional expenses. If allowable costs for the project are less than the amount awarded, for example, under budget, any unused funding will revert back to the state. It cannot be used for additional purchases, renovations, or any other expense related to the nonprofit organization. It's important to note that in order to be reimbursed for eligible project costs, the following documentation must be available for submission at the time of reimbursement: paid invoice from a vendor authorized to do business in New York State, canceled check or bank statement evidencing payment on corporate credit or on corporate credit card. The invoice and canceled check and/or bank statement and corporate credit card must also be under the legal name of the applicant and not under a parent or child organization or a private individual. It must all be in the name that is registered with the Department of State and the IRS for the organization. All NICIP GDAs will terminate on December 31st, 2026. There will be no extensions or exceptions to this. It is expected that the project will be fully completed and all payment requisitions will be processed and paid by this deadline. Any NICIP funds not dispersed by the state will be forfeited by the grantee and made available for future NICIP funding opportunities. If you've had a grant with DASNY before, you know how critical the financial review is in the grant administration process. DASNY will undertake a financial review of the project to be funded by the NICIP award. The financial review ensures that state funding will be utilized either on its own or in conjunction with other funding sources to finance a fully functional capital project. As set forth in Section 2.5 of the RFA, the full project amount must be secured. As long as the applicant provides financial documentation with their application, the financial review should be very easy and quick for DASNY to complete. DASNY should already have all the information needed to complete this review. This includes an established project budget, substantiated by recent estimates, quotes, and/or proposals from qualified professionals and/or vendors. Estimates, quotes, and/or proposals, as a reminder, must be dated within 1 year of DASNY's review, and evidence of additional funding must be submitted if the total project cost is more than the grant amount. If the grant will be utilized for a phase of an overall project, the phase must be a standalone project with a recognized capital asset upon completion. Grant funding cannot be used for costs that are not capital in nature or otherwise ineligible under the NICIP grant program. If other funding sources will be utilized to fully fund your project, the applicant must provide evidence that all funding sources have been secured, are committed, and available to complete the project. If the project will be funded by the following, we would expect to see grantee equity. We would expect to see a letter from the qualified applicant's financial officer committing the funds necessary to complete the project. The letter should be accompanied by a bank statement or recently audited financial statements, specifically outlining out the accounts that will fund the project. Adopted budget. If any portion of the project will be funded by a line item from an adopted budget, we would expect to see a letter from the qualified applicant's financial officer along with an adopted board resolution. The resolution should commit the funds necessary to complete the project and identify the source of such funds. Bonds. Grant funds cannot be used to reimburse project costs initially paid from bond proceeds. Therefore, the amount of bonds issued for the project cannot equal the total project budget. There must be a gap of non-bonded project funding at least equal to the grant amount. We would expect to see a letter from the qualified applicant's financial officer confirming that grant proceeds will not be used to reimburse any costs financed by the bonds, and the allocation of bond proceeds should also be included. For example, sources and uses from the official statement and account balances. Capital campaign, fundraising, and donations, we would expect to see the amount that has been committed to date and the amount that has been actually received in the qualified applicant's bank account. Only the amount received to date as committed to the project can be considered secured funding, and qualified applicants must clearly demonstrate how the gap will be bridged until such time all monies are received. Loans or line of credit, short-term loans, 1 year or less, or lines of credit may be paid off with grant proceeds. We would expect to see the executed loan documents if available. If the loan has not closed yet, we would expect to see the executed commitment letter along with an estimated timeline for satisfying any conditions to closing. If costs have been incurred to date, we would expect to see an expenditure report for the costs that have been paid. This report must include the task, vendor, invoice number, check number, date of costs incurred, and total. Please remember, though, that the project cannot have started nor the costs incurred prior to April 1st, 2023. The only costs that could have been incurred prior to April 1st, 2023 are design, engineering, and other preliminary planning activities, but these costs will not be reimbursed by the NICIP grant funds. There are 3 different seeker classifications. Type 1 means that the project is on a list of actions likely to have adverse impacts or a known impact. Type 2 means it's on a list of actions not likely to cause adverse environmental impacts, and unlisted means that it's not on a Type 1 or Type 2 list. DASNY's Office of Environmental Affairs completes a seeker review on all projects that we receive for grants. If you're not sure whether the project location is historical or not, the location can be searched in the Cultural Resource Information System, or CRIS. In this database, you can complete the following tasks: submit project documentation for federal, state, or seeker environmental review, search for historical building sites and districts, view historic resource inventory forms, National Register nominations, and survey reports, and submit properties for an evaluation of eligibility or potential nomination to the National Register of Historic Places. Next, we will go over the NICIP timeline, which I will turn it back over to Annie.
Thank you, Meg. NICIP, as we've said throughout this presentation, is for shovel-ready projects. The whole purpose of this program is to make critical, targeted, timely project investments across the state to help organizations serve New Yorkers better. With that in mind, we're not only doing our first come, first serve, but we here at DASNY are prepared to move at a very quick, timely, if not rapid pace to ensure that if your application is deemed qualified, we do turn it around and get you a grant disbursement agreement as soon as is humanly possible so that you can do your project. Let's say, for example, you submit a project to replace the roof on a building you own. Your project application would have your deed, it would have the roofing estimate, it would show the outline of the cost, and we'll use as this example, you are requesting the entire project cost to be funded with grant funds. That project scores a 95 or higher, it is advanced to DASNY for processing. As you can see on the timeline on the screen, our application window is opening on December 15th. As I said earlier, we are going to begin scoring on Monday, the 18th of December, and score all the way through the applications that we receive. Initially, obviously, the goal is to utilize all available funding, but then, as you saw earlier, all applications received will be held and kept on a list. Therefore, if, say, your application is received and it comes in and the available funding has been advanced for processing, and we're out of funds and you're the next in line, you will stay the next in line through till February 15th, 2025, should anyone forfeit or turn out to need less funds than they requested. As funds become available, they are advanced to the next person in line. That's why you see scoring applications, the extension is huge and long. It is not short. We're not just going to score through the month of December. We will keep scoring and keep people on that waiting list, even after the application window closes. When qualifying applications are passed over to the DASNY Grant Administration team for reviewing, we expect to notify all grantees. As it says here, we anticipate on or about, if not earlier, the 26th of December, the initial group that scored a 95 or higher will have been notified by DASNY. They will have had an outreach by Grants Administration, and more than likely, the processing team will reach out for a conference call. Again, your application should have 90+% of what DASNY will do to do our reviews. You will be sent, if you're a qualifying applicant, you'll be sent the certifications that Meg mentioned. Your organization will also be sent the grantee questionnaire. As soon as that stuff gets back to the folks at DASNY's Grant Administration Unit, we will process them. We will initiate the seeker review by our Office of Environmental Affairs so that they can verify that if you needed anything done, it's been done and it's secured, or if you were a type 2, you can be deemed a type 2 and you're done. We could see our first grant disbursement agreement sometime in March. I estimated the 15th of March is probably the first time we'll be sending out a GDA. Don't hold me to the exact date. Could be a little bit before, could be a little after. But we wanted to show everyone who's looking at this program that we anticipate moving and moving quickly. We'll get you a grant disbursement agreement as soon as we can. Once you have your grant disbursement agreement, you are free to begin your project, as is with every DASNY program that we administer here in the Grants Administration Unit. We encourage all grantees to not incur costs until they have an executed grant disbursement agreement. At that point, you then know you can submit for reimbursement. Until you have a grant disbursement agreement or GDA, it's not a done deal. So if you can, hold off on executing your project and incurring project costs until you have an executed grant disbursement agreement. Payment requisitions can be submitted by grantees with executed GDAs as soon as they have their copy of the grant disbursement agreement, which, since it's done a DocuSign, is instantaneously as it is signed here at DASNY. We send them to the grantees sign them, their attorneys review them, offer their opinion of counsel, it comes back to DASNY, it's audited here in-house. As soon as it is executed by the DASNY executive team, DocuSign sends out copies to every participant in the DocuSign envelope. If you've never used one before, you will get it instantaneously. So if it's signed at 10 a.m. on a given day at DASNY, you'll have your copy back by 10:05. You can then, should you have costs, and again, hopefully you don't, but as soon as you have costs, you can submit your reimbursements, which is why you see in the timeline on your screen that if we think we can do a GDA on the 15th of March, then there's a good chance if you have costs on the 15th of March, you can submit that reimbursement that same day as soon as you have your executed GDA. Now, as we've said many times, it is expected that all qualifying applicants clear all review processes and get to the point of an executed GDA within 6 months. So if you receive an email from DASNY on December 26th saying, congratulations, your qualification is deemed qualified, your application has been processed to DASNY for a NICIP grant in the amount of $75,000. You have 6 months from December 26th to get an executed GDA. We expect you to have an executed GDA by June 26, 2023. If you fail to meet that, you don't send back your certifications, you're asked an additional verifying question and you don't respond, you don't submit the grantee questionnaire, whatever the reason is, come June 2026, that $75,000 NICIP activation isn't it a GDA? It's forfeited. What happens to that $75,000? We go back to the waiting list. We go to the next qualifying applicant in line. And if the event, and as soon as there is enough available funds to fund that particular project, it advances to DASNY. That's why you see that window of when we're sending out notification to qualifying applicants is very large, because while we anticipate a huge rush in the beginning of a rolling application period, we're also leaving the opportunity open so as funds become available through forfeiture or declination of awards, it can go on to the next person, and so on and so on and so on. So all applications that we receive that meet eligibility will be scored, and that list will be maintained, and all those applications will be good until February 15th, 2025. As long as funds become available, we will keep taking off that list to advance qualifying projects. February 15, 2025, all the applications submitted as part of this RFA expire. Should any other funds become available, whether there's additional appropriations made by the legislature and the executive, or there are future forfeitures or declinations of award by NICIP grantees prior to 2026 end program, we will hold those for future rounds. And again, all projects are expected to be completed, submitted for requisition, and paid by the state controller by December 31st, 2026. If you've ever worked with DASNY or another state agency, you know that requisitions are not instantaneous. They're not only reviewed by our accounts payable folks and audited to be certain that they meet all the criteria, they are then advanced to the controller for processing. Standard reimbursement for all of DASNY's programs working through the controller is 4 to 6 weeks. So if you're working on your project and you're trying to meet this deadline, you cannot submit a requisition on the 29th of December, 2026. It will never be audited, reviewed, and processed by both DASNY's accounts payable and the controller by the 31st. You will forfeit. Anticipate submitting your final requisition, if you have not already, sometime in early October of 2026 to be certain you will meet that deadline. However, we anticipate that most projects will be long done by fall of 2026 and all relevant requisitions will be paid. We are hoping that we have a successful outlay of grants and quality projects throughout the state, from Montauk to Buffalo, Plattsburgh to New York City, and that we show in the future that this is something that we should continue. We wish all of you the best of luck. And Meg, I don't know if you have any more, I think a couple closing statements,
Yes.
but pay attention to the timeline, read the documentation, and good luck.
Thank you, Annie. So just to close it up today, to maintain a fair and open process, DASNY is not able to answer individual questions regarding an open competitive grant opportunity. If you have any questions, please refer to the NICIP RFA information that's posted on the Grants Gateway and in NICIP section of DASNY's website. Thank you for listening to today's webinar, and I hope you have a great day.
Take care.